Okay, so that was actually deeply impressive. The numbers there were very interesting. Clearly, media owners are getting into native advertising in a fairly big way, but how do you build content within native advertising that builds trust? And our next speaker is the Director of Content for the Foundry in the UK, and therefore pretty well placed to help us understand that. So please welcome Carla Faria.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think it is afternoon now, isn't it? Yes, I'm Carla. I'm the director of the Foundry at Time Inc. UK, and our job is to be the commercial content department for Time Inc. And it's a very interesting job. And so the subject matter today is something that's very close to my heart, and it's about how to create and sustain trust through native, because it's something, as we've heard in the last two sessions, is in very short supply, and it's at an all-time low, as we know. But trust in general is the hot potato subject of the moment. I think we've talked about almost very little else. I mean, whether it's the proliferation of fake news or the distrust that comes with having an imbalance between algorithm and editor, there are so many reasons and so many layers to this mistrust that we have to try and solve it. But we're not going to try and solve the trust issue in media in general. We're going to stick with content, and I think the way we're going to do it is a very interesting way. We're going to step away from content and from media just for a moment and just think about the concept of trust. Why is it that we trust some people, and yet others, even after several meetings, we just think, I wouldn't even touch him with your barge pole. Why is it that we trust some people other than others? So if you were to talk to sociologists, behavioral economists, psychologists, anthropologists, all the ologists who know what they're talking about, they would tell you that there are so many layers that play into the creation of trust and the sustaining of trust in any relationship. It's almost really difficult to try and build just an equation, something to really easily understand. But if we try and think about it this way, and we think about how trust is built around a transaction, and actually if we think about what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is content, the creation of content and the consumption of content is a transaction of sorts. The content creator and the content consumer are transacting around that content. If we think about trust around a transaction, it becomes actually quite a lot easier to understand. There are a number of cornerstones that build those foundations for trust. The first one is affinity. So affinity is that whole feeling of kinship, the feeling that the person is wanting to transact with you, wanting to build a relationship with you, is a little bit like you. Whether it's the fact that you come from the same part of the world, you think the same way, you like the same music, you're into the same things. That little piece of kinship, that piece of, they're a little bit like me, just brings you closer together. You feel that innate trust as soon as you feel kinship. Next up, ability. I always think about it this way. If I were to stumble across somebody, or if it were me, dislocated collarbone, can you dislocate your collarbone? Dislocate your shoulder. I wouldn't want just anybody to try and click it back into place. I would be wanting somebody who knew what they were talking about to do it for me. And whether that person is a paramedic or whether they're a scout leader who's been doing it for 20 years, doesn't matter. I'm much more likely to trust somebody who knows what they're doing. Ability is a very, very strong cornerstone for trust. Next up, the one that's probably easiest to understand, integrity. They know what they're talking about, and they're true to their word. They've proved themselves time and time again to be the person that they say they are and to do what they say they're going to do. Integrity, as I say, it's the obvious one. The next one is the one that I love because it isn't always that obvious, but it's benevolence. If you're in a situation, a transactional situation, where somebody is giving something to somebody else or trying to persuade somebody to do something, you're much more likely to trust them and believe in them if you feel they're not just in it for themselves, they're not just in it for the money, or if we're talking about content, they're not just in it for the follows and the likes and the shares. They're in it because they actually care about the outcome, and they care about the outcome for me, not just them. So these four cornerstones are really, really important just in terms of building trust. Forget about content, forget about native, forget about media. This is just about trust. But the question is, does it apply to content too? Damn right it does. It applies tenfold to content. Let's look through them. Affinity, it's that sense of kinship, the gosh, they're a little bit like me, aren't they? This is highly relevant to content, because if you are reading content or consuming content where you feel that the content creator is a little bit like you, they're just a little bit similar, you feel they understand you, they speak your language, they use some of the same terminology, you're immediately drawn to trust them. It happens automatically, you don't even have to try. Ability. Now, ability is a really interesting one because it's more than just knowing your subject, whether you're talking cycling, fishing, fashion, or beauty. It's more than that. And it actually comes back to, I think, one of the presenters on the panel this morning, a little bit earlier today, was talking about the fact that traditional media, I think it was James Wildman, was saying that traditional media is having a little bit of a resurgence in trust. And this is where magazine media is really where people trust heavily. And one of the reasons is that even if you don't understand the ins and outs of putting together a magazine or putting together a daily paper, you know, even as a layperson, that there is some rigor behind this. It's no easy job to get a publication written, photographed, designed, laid out, researched, fact-checked, subbed to hell, put to bed, gone to the printer, for example. And it works very well with magazine digital brands as well. There is a rigor, there is an almost military-like operation to get one of those publications sorted and done and looking flawless. You innately believe, you innately trust because they are able, they are capable. Next up, the one that really is easy to understand for all of us, is integrity. And integrity in content is that it's that brand voice thing that I think we all know when we are reading our favorite publication, whether that's Marie Claire or the New York Times, it doesn't matter. You know that you trust them, you trust what they say because you recognize that voice. It hasn't faltered. It hasn't faltered for years. They do what they say they're going to do. They put the paper out, or they put the post up, or they put the Instagram post up when they say they're going to. You know what to expect because they live by it. Last up, my favorite, is benevolence. Benevolence is the fact that you care about your viewer or your user or your reader. You actually care about what they think. You want their feedback. So one of the really interesting pointers about why benevolence is so vital in creating good content that people will trust is when you think, whether it's traditional media or digital media, you think about how the content creator leaves himself open for feedback. Whether it's the old-fashioned letters page that people still love because they get answered. They get answered, and if they don't get answered, somebody who's like them gets answered. Or whether it's that stream, that thread of comments after the blog post. When you leave yourself open as a content creator to feedback, it's a really, really powerful thing because you show that you care about your consumer, you care about your viewer or your reader, you care about what they think. And if you're really smart, you'll get involved in that conversation too. So these three cornerstones matter tremendously when it comes to content. But what about native? Are we at a distinct disadvantage with native? Because we're asking people to view, follow, or read something that's been paid for. Is it made dirtier because of the money? I would say absolutely not. What you need to do is take those four cornerstones, those innate values that cement trust, affinity, ability, integrity, and benevolence, and make sure that they feed through to how you create content every day and how you create that native content every day. But before we talk about it, I think we need to just define native, the most difficult job in the world, because everybody defines native differently. The way we do it at Time Inc. is that we talk about a spectrum of commercial content. At one end of the spectrum is pure editorial content, something the editors create, and if there happens to be a partner who wants to jump on board and pop the logo on and pay some money, do so. That's editorial content. It does not get changed. It is editorial. It's slated to be created, or it has already been created. Other end of the spectrum is the advertorial, the much maligned advertorial. Nothing wrong with advertorials at all. An advertorial is a piece of content, written, video, photo essay, doesn't matter. It's been created by the editor or by the content team to the client specifications, but the client retains the control. They are allowed to chip away at it, play with it, edit it, and then set it live. Bang in the middle, the part that we feel is the sweet spot is native. It's the part where we bear in mind the client's objectives and their strategies, but the editorial team create it. And the only people who edit that are the editorial team, so it still retains that voice. So, knowing this definition of native, what could be the 4 golden rules? Rule number 1, never fail to be authentic. Authenticity, another much overused word in media and especially in content. For the sake of this conversation, what authenticity means is do not stray from that brand voice. And by brand voice, I mean publisher brand voice. So advertisers out there, if you want to commission a publisher, a content creator to create content for you, let them hold on to it in their voice. Let them do it in their way. That brand voice, that host brand voice has to ring out of every word, every sentence, every photo, every frame of video. It has to be true. As soon as the advertiser starts to chip away at it, and they're not chipping away at it for any bad reason, they're chipping away because they want to try and make it better. Advertisers, with the best will in the world, you cannot make it as true as the content creator can, because the content creator knows their audience. The more you chip away at it, the more it feels to the viewer or the reader as though there's an imposter in the room, and nobody likes an imposter. So, if you are able to keep your content authentic, you preserve integrity, and you preserve affinity. You're a bit like me. That sense that the editor is actually talking to the reader or the viewer. Be opinionated. This is another one that I love, because when you look at editorial content, whether it's viewable or readable, you'll always see that the person who's creating that content or the party that's creating that content cares. They have an opinion. They won't be polarizing, because that's a surefire way to alienate half your audience. And they won't necessarily campaign like mad, unless that's the job of the publication. But what they will do is there will be an opinion there. You'll always sense that they care. They care enough to jump off the fence and take a little bit of a stand. So if that's the way that we do it with editorial, that's the way we should be doing it with native. We shouldn't just be producing content because somebody paid us to. We should produce content that's got a little bit of opinion. It's got a little bit of something about it. Because in that way, again, you preserve integrity, but you're also showing benevolence. You're showing that you care, and that actually what happens when you put something that's opinionated in there, something interesting happens. Your readers or your viewers want to share their opinion back, and that closening of the gap builds trust. The benevolence piece is very important there. Next up, be purposeful. You would not see a piece of editorial content ever go live if it didn't have a purpose to it, right? It's there for a purpose. It's there to either entertain, to educate or inform, or to do all of those things. Publishers, if you create some commercial content and it's just a little bit meh, it's a little bit of nothing, it's there just because somebody paid you to, and it doesn't have a purpose, you don't imagine that viewer or that reader in your mind's eye and think, I want them to come away from this chuckling. Or I want to come away from this going, I've got to remember those 5 points, they're amazing, and I've got to tell my friend about them. Rip it up and start again. It's got to be purposeful. And last up, and not least, and it was really, really dealt with beautifully in the last session, and I was nodding at the back, is be transparent. And this is all about labeling. Be honest about your intentions. I can't stress this hard enough. There is everything to be gained from being honest by labeling correctly. And I'm going to talk a little bit about labeling now, because it's really, really important. It's very interesting. I was astonished, actually, that 10% of the world's content creators still think it's better not to label. You must label. You want to be upfront. If you can imagine having a transaction with anybody, whether it's somebody in a shop or it's somebody you've just been introduced to, if you sense, even for an instant, that somebody's being dishonest, you ain't going to trust them. And if we're talking about building and retaining trust and sustaining trust, you must be transparent and you must label. The way we do it, we actually go a step further. We're very, very rigorous about this. We feel it's very, very important at time. And we actually label our advertorial content differently than we label our native content. We actually label our advertorial content slightly differently because we want our readers and our viewers to know that this content has A, been paid for, but B, the advertisers had control over that, and that's absolutely fine, but you should know that. And we label our native content differently because we want our readers to know that, yes, this has been paid for, and that's absolutely fine as well, but we've retained control of it. It sounds just a little bit more editorial. And I think that being upfront shows that you stick to your word. You know, this is all four, really. It's affinity, ability, transparency. It's benevolence. And it's all of those things. It really is. It's integrity as well, of course. Integrity probably top of the list. So these are probably the most important things. And if I were to give you some advice, because I've got 30 seconds, I'm going to try and stick to them. If I were to give you some advice, try and think about those 4 cornerstones. Think about it as though you were transacting with another human being. You know, if you can remember to preserve affinity, ability, integrity, and benevolence, the rest is easy. The rest is easy to remember to be transparent and to remember to have a purpose and to be opinionated, yeah, and to be authentic. Those things become easy when you remember the true cornerstones of trust. And really, all of this comes under one overarching umbrella, and that's respect. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you.
Will you take a question if there is one? We have a
If there is.
moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So raise your hand if you have a question, and there's one here. So that should be right there.
Hi. So I'd just like to know, is there...
Just tell us who you are, please, before we...
Okay. Srini from Chennai, India. Has there been a situation where a native advertiser has approached you, and your content team has not want to work with these guys because these 4 reasons don't come through?
Absolutely. So it's actually a really good question, because the bottom line is this is about, are you prepared to turn away the money, right?
Yeah.
I think once you've committed to native, you have to be prepared to walk away sometimes. Now, there are 2 bits to this answer. The big answer, the easy answer is ultimately you have to be prepared to walk away if you feel it's not right. And the reason is, for all of those points that I presented on, the best editorial team in the world can't work their way around something they don't believe in. The secondary way of talking about it, because we have come up, obviously, I think all content creators and media owners will come up against this, is there is often a way. We have a fantastic beauty brand, fashion and beauty brand, where the editor always says, there is always a way, because I'm not just talking to women, in her case, about fashion and beauty. I'm talking to them about their life. They are just real women who walk the earth, and they go through all the normal things that women do. They have to make dinner. They have to work on a day they don't feel like working. So they will tend to come across life situations. So there is almost always, with a really smart editorial team who are really committed, there's almost always a way of being able to build a story. But as with all of these things, you know, when we talked about respect at the end, all parties have to be prepared to respect. It's not something that happens automatically. So the advertiser in that case has to be prepared, they have to be prepared to take the editorial team's or the content creators team's word for it when they propose how they're going to come at the subject. And they have to step back and let them get on with it, because they will need to come at it very innovatively if it's not going to be a natural match. It can be done usually. Of course, there are going to be cases where we need to walk away.
Okay. If there is one more, we'll take it, but it needs to be a relatively short one. Could we hurl the green cube in that direction, please? Multiple stages are fine. Feel free to... Oh! Good catch,
Somebody
sir.
filmed that.
Very good catch.
Hi. My name is Arun Puri. I'm from Delhi, India. Can you give me an example of native advertising you've done for Time magazine specifically?
I can't do it for Time magazine specifically because I work across the UK division.
Right.
But I can give you lots of examples from other brands, if that helps.
Oh, but
Or better still, if you want me to give you some examples from Time, I will get them for you and I will send them to you.
Yeah, I'm concerned because Time is known for its church and state division, so and very cussed journalists.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether they have succumbed to native advertising or not.
It's a good question because I can't answer it. But yes, we do native.
I mean, it's easy to do it for other kind of titles.
We do it across the board, and I mean I think it's a really interesting one. But for us, church and state are coming together. That divide is really being knocked down for good reason. We can't keep them separate anymore.
Yeah.
For all of the reasons I talked about, the editorial teams have to believe in everything that they're writing or filming. They have to believe in absolutely everything. So again, this actually connects with the last question. If you cannot bring yourself to believe in the product or the service that you're writing about, it's perfectly okay to say no. But actually, I can't answer that question. I will have to find out.
So we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. We have no more time for questions. But can I ask you, please, to thank Carla very much? Thank you.